I mean, religion, I could take any number of reasons why I think it's better to junk the whole thing, but start with religions are supremacist just by their nature. If you're telling people what happens when you die, which nobody knows, and you're telling who the great master of the universe is, you kind of have to be in a place where you can't abide other thoughts on the subject. And certainly all religions are like that. Islam is super supremacist in that way. And a lot of the people today who are speaking for it will tell you right to your face, why am I supporting this? Because Islam is the best. Of course, obviously, that's why we justify these things. And certainly the Bible, same thing. I mean, God is very supremacist for the Jews. I find it very amusing that the thing that they are accusing the Jews of today of doing, colonizing, ethnic cleansing, which are neither true, are true in the Bible. That's exactly what God tells the Jews to do. Ethnically cleanse the Canaanites, commit genocide if you have to. God tells them, kill all the men. This is this in the Bible. You've written about it in there. To kill all the men, the Midianites, another number of people, kill all the men and the women who aren't virgins, kids. I mean,
yeah, standard pattern of human warfare.
I know, but for people who take a book as the guide to morality, it's filled with terrible morality.
Yeah.
But again, not to keep beating a dead horse about why religion is so horrible in any form, but if you read the teachings of the Mormon Church until recently, the things they say about Black people are just horrendous. The worst kind of racist thing. And they justify it by talking about that
Ham.
Well, no, that's interesting. They get it. The Black people in religion get it from two sources. The Mormons talk about Cain.
Yeah.
That Black people are a descendant of Cain, and because Cain is a murderer and he did a dark deed, I mean, they're very open about that's why they have dark skin, to remind us of the darkness in their past. I mean, it's just ugly. Yes, the other thing that the Southerners in this country used was Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham
was the contemptuous son.
Also the one who wanted to f his dad. I guess, or maybe both of them, I don't know. But Ham, think the black line runs from Ham.
Right.
But both of them, again, use religion to be justifying what we would today call one of the worst things, racism.
Okay, well, don't look, right.
Is it worth it to resurrect that whole structure when it comes with that? It's what I call the one turd in the pool theory. I mean, a book that contains, we're okay with slavery, it's terrible on women, it's terrible on homosexuals. It's like if somebody said, yeah, but you know what? There's only one turd in the pool, jump on in. I wouldn't jump in if there was even one turd in the pool. And I wouldn't want to resurrect a book and a mythology
okay.
You get me?
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing incoherent about that argument. Although I think it still leaves you in an awkward position, because the postmodernist would say, take a look at your stance and say, well, you defend Western civilization, and there's plenty of turds floating in that pool. Well, but
okay.
Right.
All right, you win that one.
Well, it's rough because
there are plenty of turds floating in that pool.
At the past,
that's true.
Right? And
but here's the thing: we can fish our turds out. Like we had slavery, but we fished that turd out of the pool. You can't do that. The Bible is the Bible.
Yeah,
it's there, and it was written by God.
It was the Protestant evangelists that did that.
What?
Took that particular bit of pollution out of the pool, right? That was Wilberforce in the UK, and he was completely motivated by religious motivations.
People who were for emancipation.
He was the one who convinced the UK to put their navy against slavery.
In 1776, when our country was declared independent, there were 24 people in this country who belonged to the Abolitionist Society. They were mostly Quakers. 24 people in the whole country thought abolition of slaves was a good idea.
Yeah. Well, Wilberforce in the UK started out kind of as one.
But it gathered steam.
Right.
It gathered steam. And 87 years later, 7 years later, we did something about it. that's the big argument against religion versus science. It's self-correcting. We can be self-correcting. Religion, to a lot of people, seems too rigid. I mean, its virtue is that it's set in stone. This is what we believe. That's what they're counting on, is that people want that sort of certainty about something.
Okay, so
that it's
then,
not going to
so
change.
there's-
That's what the Pope is always selling.
So one of the criticisms that Christ levies against the Pharisees in particular is exactly that criticism. He says to them, this is one of the things that sets himself up for crucifixion, because it's a very vicious insult. He tells the Pharisees that they worship their own doctrines as if they're religious truths, and that they would have killed the prophets. Had they been around in the time of the prophets that they purport to worship, they would have killed them. Said that they walk across the graves of their own prophets. Yeah. They haunt the graves of their own prophets. That's a good way of thinking about it. So he accuses them of a very deep cynicism. And he's trying to make the same point you're making, which is that you're not supposed to worship the static doctrines of men as if they're religious doctrines, and that there's something in the transformation process that isn't encapsulated in the letter of the law. So what would you say? You don't privilege the letter of the law over the spirit of the law. And I think part of what the genuine religious enterprise is the attempt to identify what that spirit is, that dynamic spirit. And I think that can be done. I think, and it does, it has an affinity, for example, with this idea that it's incumbent on you to voluntarily confront the tragedy and malevolence of life. And that if you do that, it will transform you. And we know that clinically. Like, all the different schools of psychotherapy converged on a few realizations. One of them was that it was useful to get people to get their story straight, to recount their story.
Right.
Another was that if you expose people to the things that they're afraid of and that they're avoiding, that they get stronger. That works. That's how you help people overcome anxiety, for example, social anxiety. It's also the fundamental mechanism of learning, is to put yourself on the edge of disaster and dance there, and that expands you.
Gordon Liddy once said that he was afraid of lightning, so he tied himself to a tree during a storm. I mean, that's an extreme version.
And now we know there isn't a God, because if there was, and it was Gordon Liddy tied to a tree. Yeah, but look, you use exposure training in therapy all the time. And a lot of what you do when you're trying to help people heal is return to that idea of the snake on the staff. It's like, what are you afraid of that's stopping you from moving forward? That's what you try to find out in therapy. It's like, what is it that's paralyzing you? Okay, now can we break that down into manageable bites so that you can confront it? And people, see, it was a weird thing, because the behaviorists were the first people that figured this out, that you could expose people to what they were afraid of voluntarily, and that they would become less afraid. That was the theory. They become less afraid. The psychoanalyst said that's not going to work, because maybe someone's afraid of an elevator, but they're not really afraid of the elevator. They're afraid of death. And if you get them to relax about the elevator, their fear will just pop up somewhere else.
Right.
But that isn't what happened. What happened was that if you got people to face any one thing they were afraid of voluntarily, they started to learn that they were more capable than they thought. And that made their bravery generalize. And that's really what kids do when they go out into the world, right? They find a challenge and they overcome it. And they learn that they're the sort of creature that can find a challenge and overcome it. And that generalizes. And that happened in psychotherapy. And then there's a radicalization of that idea in the Gospels. And in this story of the brazen serpent, it's like, there's no limit to that. You take the worst, and this is also part and parcel of hero myth, because the most ancient story we have, literally, is a variant of the dragon treasure story, right? That the quest is...
I love that part in the book.
Yeah. It's a very useful thing to know.
Look, if you're a person who has been listening for this last half hour and doesn't know what the we're talking about, that book isn't for you. But if you're a person who has even a little bit of understanding of the Bible, you don't even have to be religious. It's a historical document. I really found this book so fascinating. It's so great. It's like what you just... Hey, everyone, I'm on Substack now. Check it out and subscribe now at billmaher.substack.com. What could be simpler than that? My name, then dot, Substack.com.